Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In the small hours of this morning, we got the results of two by-elections. You may have missed it because there were no upsets. Labour won Batley and Spen, while the Conservatives retained David Cameron's Oxfordshire seat of Witney. Our political correspondent, Mark Labelle, brings us up to speed on both. Mark, let's start with Batley and Spen. This was Jo Cox's old seat, by-election created by her tragic murder. What happened there?
Well, as expected, Tracy Brabin, a friend of Jo Cox, who, as you said, was killed last June and why we're having this by-election in the first place, won a confident victory. There were some far-right parties that did stand, but none of them retained their deposit, the £500 that they put forward, because none of them got more than 5% of the vote. And in her acceptance speech, Tracy Brabin said it was a bittersweet moment. It was a tragedy that the by-election had to be held in any place. And Brendan Cox, the husband of the late Jo Cox, tweeting that he was happy that the purveyors of hate, as he referred to the candidates taking on Tracy Brabin, were defeated and didn't return their deposits. There was some heckling during that acceptance speech too, but Labour holding it with a turnout of around 25%.
And the other major parties didn't contest it, but they did contest the Witney by-election, David Cameron's old seat, by-election caused by him standing down. The Lib Dems threw a lot into this. They went from a rather poor fourth in the election now to second. The Conservatives still held on to it reasonably comfortably. What's being said about this result?
Well, it was Theresa May's first electoral test, really, wasn't it, Andrew, since she became Prime Minister, and she passed it just. It wasn't a great victory with the loss of 20,000 votes. But for the Liberal Democrats, well, they're claiming a big victory here, going in from fourth to second place with from 7 to 30% of the vote. And the reason why? Well, Tim Farron seems to be suggesting that in such a constituency with such a strong Remain vote, voters were really calling to him to look at keeping the keeping the UK in the EU single market. One thing was for sure, though, whatever the reason, he was cock-a-hoop.
Oh, all right.
Great result. I mean, the 19% swing from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats is the best result for the Lib Dems in a by-election against the Conservatives for nearly 20 years. And it feels like we're the comeback kids of British politics. We've fought a great campaign here, and lots of people have voted for us because they saw us as fighting for a much better direction for our country, providing a strong alternative to the Tories, which we desperately need. And that's why Labour faded and we took second place from them.
So that was the Lib Dem leader after the result. Mark, did they actually harbour hopes of winning this by-election, or are they pretty content with a decent second?
Well, Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson was on the Today programme this morning saying that the real reason was to embarrass Labour by taking that second place slot. But they did throw everything into this. 100 peers came out. Tim Farron reportedly visited 5 times. They were certainly hoping, we understood, for a closer second place. And maybe, just maybe, with a hope of taking this seat, one of these types of seats that they really need to start taking back in order to reverse the terrible losses that they suffered last year. I think it's fair to say that this could be seen by some Lib Dems as at least kick-starting their recovery, although as the turnout was under 50%, we can't take it that seriously.
All right, Mark Labelle, thank you for that. On the two by-elections, Rowena Mason, can you be the comeback kid by coming second?
Well, no. I mean, I think we shouldn't overread it too much, because if you look at the national polls, the Lib Dems are still down there on sort of 6-7%. Well, the other thing to say actually is that it is the sort of fall in a government's share of the vote that you would expect
in a by-election.
In a by-election. On the other hand, you might have expected the official opposition to be the party that did better in that seat. So Labour gaining more than the Lib Dems, and it is a huge amount to have gone up for the Lib Dems.
Yes, it's a big increase in their vote.
I mean, what I would say is that it might give Theresa May a little bit of pause for thought if it is still in the back of her mind that she might call a general election sometime in the next year or so. There are a lot of seats in the southwest. that the Tories took off the Lib Dems last time. If there were to be a Lib Dem revival, some of those seats could swing back, and that could be dangerous to her majority. I would say that's one of the dangers of her calling
into the mix
a general election.
Consider it.
Yes.
Mr. Farron is claiming that this was a vote for staying in the single market. What's the evidence for that?
Well, I don't think there is any real evidence for it, other than the fact that...
Or is there any evidence, real or not?
Well, there's some, in the sense that this was a seat, believe it or not, that actually voted Remain in the EU referendum. So I think that's what they're trying to extrapolate. It's a bit like the government trying to read lots of different things into this year's Brexit vote, because, you know, they've, at the party conference, read in all sorts of stuff about whether or not it was a vote on migration, whether it was a vote on the way Britain's being left behind by globalisation. And you can overdo interpretation of election results. The one thing you can't misinterpret is the fall in Labour's vote. And Jeremy Corbyn has got to have some worries really about this. Normally,
how much was the fall in Labour's vote?
Well, Labour, they went down slightly in percentage, but the crucial thing was that they didn't mop up all this anti-Tory sentiment, which, if you're the official opposition, is the important thing.
In a by-election in a place like Whitney, would really Labour
but they've
really
reversed,
expect
they've reversed to type, not to 2015, but to 2010, when Labour came third. And don't forget, the reason this is worrying for Labour is that this Lib Dem surge, this fight back, has been in council by-elections as well. And it's not just against the Tories. Labour have lost to Lib Dems on big swings in Derbyshire, in the North East, and also in Sheffield. And that's why a lot of Labour MPs are worried. Their own leader says, look, judge us by by-election results, even council by-election results, and yet they've not been that good.
Would you not be mad to factor in this result either way on whether or not she should call an early election? I mean, by-elections are notoriously inaccurate about everything.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that will really determine what she does is just how poorly Labour continues to poll nationally. And if it continues on the low level it's at the moment, and if the Tories are above 40%, don't forget there was a poll this week that put them on 47%.
That was partly the collapse of the UKIP.
Yeah, and again, UKIP collapsed here in this by-election last night, don't forget. That's what she'll be looking at more than anything else. Okay. And that big gap between Labour and the Tories.
So don't keep your eye on Whitney.
No.
Very well.
I've been getting away with it all